You brought them all down together?
I bet you someone didn't miss anything on this.
Okay, Gabriel, we're at the top of the page?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We left it yesterday.
Yes.
The book?
Okay. Let's look at these guys.
They took the book.
What?
Should I go get it?
I don't think they know where it is.
Maybe they left. They didn't bring everything. It looks like it's on the chair. Must be. You know.
I think there were 2 or 3 blue.
No, just blue. More story.
Well, yeah, that's true. Look on this shelf.
Okay, go ahead.
Maybe with the blue, it's blue.
What about here? Did you look? Maybe somebody put it back.
So we are at 47A. Oh, is David, you can start. Is this Gemara missing?
All right, should we start?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, easy. Here,
Okay.
you take this now. No, I'm sorry.
No, Seth, you take this one. No, it's okay. But there's nobody using it. I'm gonna find one.
No, the
Raj is not here.
256. Page 256.
He wants his article. Okay, so just by way of kind of introduction, just to remind everyone. So what we're doing is, this parak started with the 18 things listed in the Mishnah, which talk about what makes something a treifa, and we've been hung up the past few days on the lung, which is appropriate because that's a very that's one of the most relevant areas halacha l'maisa. But just bring you back to the Mishnah. I just wanted to quote the Machlokas because it's going to come up again today. It says, Harish nikva, a lung that's punctured, o shechasra, or that it's lacking. We're going to have to understand what that means. That's going to be a treifa. But then Rav Shimon argues, he says, ad shetinikva lebeta simponot. No, the puncture will only be a treifa if it gets all the way to the main bronchial tube. So that's kind of the introduction. We spent the past couple of days going through different ailments of the lung, which would be considered fatal, and in turn a treifa.
I think it's punctured. This goes through two membranes.
2 membranes. That's correct.
If it's a scratch on the skin, it's not treifa.
That's the
It's
whole.
not treifa.
No, that's the whole question.
It has to be
all the way through.
And,
Yeah.
there's these tenues sitting on top.
Yeah, we're going to get into it more today, but yes, what we covered previously is that there's 2 membranes, and it's a puncture that goes through both membranes is what makes it a treifa, as regards to that. What's that?
Where are these membranes?
I think it's the lung itself.
Yeah, the covering.
Did you see the video that Amo sent out last night?
Yeah.
Oh, you don't want to watch that video.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, next issue. So yesterday at the end of the daf, we dealt with something called sircha, which talks about 2 of the pieces being joined together. Now we're going to deal with blisters. We spoke previously. We said just the blister by itself is not necessarily a treifa. Only if the blister has a hole, then potentially it could be a treifa. Amar Rava, starting today's daf. Hani tarte bui desmicha lahadadi. In the case of 2 blisters that are right next to each other, leslahu b'dikuta. You don't need to check them. Why? Because they're for sure going to be considered a treifa, different than the case of 1 blister. Chada umitchaskin kitarte. Before we get to the next case, just what's the idea here? Why is it 2 blisters for sure a treifa? Because Rashi tells us that if there's 2 blisters next to each other, it means that for sure a hole. It's really coming because there was a hole underneath. So just because you can't see a hole right now, the fact that there's these 2 blisters right next to each other, it means there's a hole underneath. And some other Rishonim have a different opinion. They say the 2 blisters aren't indicative of there's a hole underneath. It's indicative of a reality that is dysfunctional for the lung. That if you have 2 blisters like that, ultimately it's going to almost definitively lead to a hole. So just a question on what the exact reason it's a treifa with the double blister. If it's so that's an interesting idea. So they're saying it's almost like a vadai. They're saying since it's definitively going to lead to the hole in a short amount of time, it will certainly die within a year. That's the way they're looking at it.
But other way, two.
It's a halachic reality.
But 2 blisters, nobody disagrees.
Yeah, it's not really, to me, it's not so much more crazy than any of the other ailments that we aren't sure whether they're going to kill, but we take the view that it's a halacha reality, it's going to die within a year. Okay, chadu mitchaze ketarte. What if you have a blister, but it looks like two blisters? So does that end up having the status of two blisters? So Gemara tells us, do a science experiment. Maisi silva, we bring a thorn or needle, uvazin la, and we pierce it. I shafcha lahadadi. If they both deflate, so then we know it's really one bubble, in which case it's kosher. Chadahi ukshera. V'ilo tartininu utrefa. And if not, if only one side, the pus dissipates, then we know there's really two, in which case it has this halachic reality of being a treifa. Okay. Okay, next case. Just before we discuss this next case of Rava, what we're doing is Rava keeps giving us various different things of the lung, which would make a treifa. So just there's a picture on if you have the article, I'm sure the Steindl has the same thing. If you see that there's a picture of the lungs, and it's got these three on one side and two chunks on the other side, and we're going to talk about if it looks different than what is typical. And we'll touch on this in the Gemara, but just it's good to keep in mind when we say right side and left side, what we're talking about is if you would hang the cow by its feet and staring at it. So your right becomes the cow's right. It's not the flip side when you normally look at something. So Amarava. Chamsha une islaria. The lung has 5 lobes. And when it says the lung has these 5 lobes, these une, that's different than the ume, which are these 2 big chunks, which are on top of it. So it's one big chunk, and then one leads into 3 lobes, one big chunk, and one leads into 2 lobes. Apa klape gavra, corresponding to the person's face. Tlasa mimina vitarte mismola. There are 3 lobes on the right and 2 on the left, and we're talking, like I said, if it's hanging, so it's really right to right. Chaser o yaser o chalaf. So Rava teaches us if it's chaser, if it's missing one of these 5 lobes, right, 3 on the right, 2 on the left. So for some reason you have 2 on the right and 2 on the left, that's a treifa. Or if it's yaser, if you have an extra one, so instead of having 3 on one side, you have 4 on the other side. O chalaf, treifa. Or if it's flipped. What does that mean, flipped? What that means is that you have the 3 on the left side instead of the right side, or vice versa. So all those 3 things, we would consider it a treifa.
All the animals, they have 5 lobes?
All the animals, well, we're going to see, but at the time of the Gemara at least, when this was written, most of the animals would have these 5 lobes on top of the 2 big lobes, yeah. It's just
cattle and sheep both have the same.
Yeah. Most of what all the commentators seems like we're talking about a cow, but I think it all applies to. I think it's both, but I'm not.
Kosher animals we talk about.
Yeah. I think so. Just one point of interest on the last word of chalaf. If it's switched, we say if it's switched around, it's a treifa. So the way most people understand that, I believe, is that if it's switched the number, instead of 3 and 2, it's 2 and 3. And I just one of the people I was listening to pointed out. I looked up the Shulchan Aruch, and that's the way the Shulchan Aruch brings down. But the Ramah, brings down basically even if it looks differently, even if it just kind of even not just the number, but just if things are looking differently, that would be enough to treif it up.
Maybe the animal is a lefty.
Right. So that's what's interesting. But saying we don't worry about that. Okay. There was a case where there was a lung that had an extra lobe, and they brought it in front of Marimar for a ruling. I guess they wanted to understand, is that indeed treif? So Havi Yosef Ravacha Abava. Ravacha was sitting in front of the room of Marimar's house. So Amar Lai, so he said to the person going, who went in to ask the Shaila, my Amar Lacha, what did he tell you? So Amar Lai, Achrei Nala. He permitted it. He said kosher. So that's different than what Rava said, right? Rava just told us if it's just Seira, it's treif. So he's saying it's not treif. So Amar Lei, Hadar Lekme. No, go back in again of him. Ask him again. Meaning, how could he possibly not know Rava's law? So Amar Lei, he brings it back into Maramar. Zil Emalei Laman Diyasav Ababa. Go tell that person who's sitting out front. He realized what was going on. That someone was giving this guy advice that his psak was wrong. Les halach kavasa derava biseris. We don't biseris. We don't paskin like Rava when it comes to the extra lobe. So machlokes amarayim on how to view that. And in fact, this machlokes ends up being you see it in the Shulchan Aruch as well. They debate this issue. V'hani milei dekaima b'dorai de'unai. So where is it true that you can have an extra lobe if it's in its natural sequence? So if it's if it's in that regular order. So if you just go back to those pictures, you have 3 that are on top of each other or 2 that are on top of each other. If it's the way I understood it, if it's in between those rows, that horizontal way. Aval binei treifa. However, if it's between the rows, it's a treifa. Meaning, in that case, I would agree if it's extra, but it's in the wrong place, then I would agree with Rava's psak. What does that mean? So that's kind of an unclear term, beni treifa. 2 ideas, there are more, but 2 that I heard that kind of seem somewhat intuitive is, one is that it's kind of where the main where the windpipe comes down, and then these lobes are on each side. Maybe it's in between them. It's not horizontal like the others. And the other opinion, which I think a lot of people tend to agree with, is that it's on the backside. This whole picture, we're viewing these lungs, we're looking as if we're staring, into, from it's going towards the inside. So what if it's facing towards the spine? So he's saying, yes, I hold you can have an extra lobe and it's still kosher, but that's provided it's in the right spot. If it's on the backside and it's facing the spine instead of facing the ground, if it's the cow, standing, then that would indeed be a treifa. And sure enough, there was a case where there was an extra lobe in the lung, and it came in front of Ravashi. Sav Ravashi limitrofa, and he was inclined to call it a treifa. Like we just said, because it was extra, but it was in the wrong spot. It was beni. Amar Rav Huna bar Avia. So Rav Huna bar Avia says to him, "Kol hani chivei braysa hachi islo, v'karale tabche inuse devarvda." So this is 2 very interesting points here. He's saying A, it's not really extra. Why? Because this extra piece is coming on these chivei baraisa, these animals which are either they could translate the word baraisa. There's 2 different opinions of how to kind of pronounce this and what the text is. One is that it's a super healthy animal, so it's like a super strong animal, so it's created differently, so it has this extra piece in the different spot. Or some people say it's referring to an animal that's from a swamp, and it's a swamp type cow, in which case it has this extra piece. And the butchers would call this extra piece, they would call it the inunusa devarda. Inunusa is like the same word we're saying the inu, but it's a small inu. And devarda is like a rose. I guess because it was delicate, and in color like a rose, so they would call it this thing. But what we're seeing is even though the Gemara had a tradition that if you would have an extra lobe in this spot, it would be unkosher, because there was a circumstance where there were many animals living in a certain region that had this extra thing, then we do not say the traditional laws of treifa would apply. So kind of Sheldon touched on this a little bit this morning, but he was coming from a different perspective. But I think it's this is obviously very very halacha l'maisa, because first of all, nowadays, from what I researched, it sounds like a lot of our cows actually have this piece, and indeed it's kosher, because like the Gemara says, it works. But also what kind of lends itself to is if you would have a whole kind of a region where certain species would come from, it sounds like you would have coverage potentially, to potentially say it could be kosher under certain circumstances, even though it's different than kind of some of our traditional rules. I'll just read two more lines. We'll just discuss this for a little bit further. V'hani mile mikvai, and this only applies where this extra piece was, underneath where it was facing down. Aval agba, but if it was on the back side, afilu kitar b'da'aser tarefa. Then even if it's on the back side, but even if it's tiny where it's only the size of a myrtle leaf, which I guess is very small, that would be enough to call it a treifa because it's considered extra. So just going on what we're saying about how things could change in different places, this is a huge topic because a lot of people have issues with the laws of treifa in general because a lot of these maladies don't necessarily scientifically apply today sometimes, or we're not as sure of it. And so there's a Tosfos on the bottom of the page. We're not going to read the whole thing, but it's a very famous Tosfos, and he says one line which people quote: "V'nira de'ein raya," that it appears that it's not this way today, and people kind of use this line to discuss the kind of the different circumstances which we have today with certain animals. And so if you'd find cows from a completely different region or chickens from a different region, they have all these different cases where it could potentially look a little different. And I'm not coming to say that it's kosher because you have to really be an expert. And you see there's so much tradition around this stuff, and there's certain kind of parameters of when you can basically say, you can go further or not. And but it all comes from this Gemara, so it's pretty fascinating. Okay, Amar Rafram. Hi Ria the Damya Leufta Trefa. So now if you have a lung that is similar to a piece of a piece of wood, then it's considered a trefa. So now the Gemara wants to know, what does that mean it's similar to a piece of wood? Ika de amri bechazuta. Some people say it means it's similar to a wood in how it looks. What does that mean? That means that it would be a palish complexion. The Ika de amri begishta. And others say no, it means based on the way it feels. It feels like a piece of wood. And if it was like a wood, either because it looked like a piece of wood or because it felt like a piece of wood, that would be treif. Ika de amri de neficha. And when we said that it looks like a piece of wood, what does that mean? It means it was blown up. It was bloated, in which case the color of it changed. It got more pale and became white. And so that if the lung was this whitish complexion, it's treif. V'ika de amri divchiza. And some people say, no, it's referring to the texture, in that it was hardened. If it was very hard, then it would be treif. V'ika de amri deshia de lesle chisucha deune. And still others people say, a third opinion, what does it mean it's like a piece of wood? It's smooth like a piece of wood. There's no bumps. So you don't have these 5 different kind of like bumps which are showing the different lobes. But either way, what the Gemara is elaborating on is these are other items which would cause the lung to fail within the year and to be a treifa.
So the last opinion, why would Rafram be suggesting that a lung that doesn't have the lobes, what's the chiddush there? If you already had the halacha that if it's missing one lobe, it's a strange interpretation of Rafram's statement.
I totally agree. I was bothered by that as well. So one thing I heard, but it doesn't really fit so well with the Gemara. I don't think they're saying like it means like it's bumpy, but but I hear you. I was bothered by that as well. Amarava, other ways that the lung could be a treifa based on the way it looks, based on the color. So Rava says if it's kechuchala kishera, if it's like this eyeliner which was blue, that would not be considered super unhealthy, where it would still be kosher. Kidyosa treifa. However, if it's like this black ink, it is a treifa. Why do we know the black ink's treif? If it looks like black ink. To Amar Rabbi Chanina, shachar adamhu ela shalaka. That black is really like red when it that got weakened, that degenerated. And he said this in regards to nida, those type of flows. So if the heart starts black, it's like a bad blood, right? It's like the degenerating of the blood. Okay, now Yeruka Kashera Midrab Nasan. Now, what if the lung is a greenish color? We're not going to translate Yeruka as yellowish. We're going to say it's specifically a greenish. That would be... What's that? Yes, exactly, like grass. Exactly. Green like grass is kosher, and we know that it's, if the lung is green like grass, it's going to be kosher, because we know it from Rav Nasan. What's the case of Rav Nasan? And then we'll see in a second. And Aduma Kashera Midrab Nasan. And if it's red... And I guess it's more than, I guess the lung itself is not really red, maybe it's pinkish, whatever, but it's a different color. So if it's red, it would also be kosher. And we know this from the teaching of Rav Nasan. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rav Nasan Omer, Pam Achas Halachti L'Charake Hayam. I once traveled to a city on the other side of the sea. Basa Isha Achas L'Pnai. A woman came in front of me, Shamala B'na Rishon Umeis Sheni Umeis. Her first son, when she circumcised him, he died. The second one, when she circumcised him, he died. Shlishi Havisi L'Pnai. So she brought the third one in front of me. Obviously looking for guidance, what to do. So Re'isa and Shahaya Adam, I saw that he was very red. So Amartila Biti Himtini Lo Ad Shiabale Bodamo. So my daughter, wait until I guess the blood moves around more, and it gets and it soaks back into him, and then you can do it safely. So I gave her this advice. Himtina lo umala oso v'chaya. So she waited till the blood chilled out a little bit. I guess it moved around, and his complexion changed. And she made the brit, and then he lived. V'hayu koronoso nasan habavli al shemi, and she called him Nasan the Babylonian after me. Cute name for a kid. V'shuv pamachat, and then another time halachti limdina kaput kaya. I went to this place called kaput kaya. Ba'asa isha lafanai, and there a woman came in front of me. Shamala b'na rishon umeis sheni umeis. Same thing. The first son died, and the second son died. Shlishi avei lafanai. The third one she brought in front of me. Re'isi Shahaya Yarok. I saw that he was green. Now, right, green. And I guess this greenish, we're saying it's really more of a greenish green, not a yellow. We'll see later, because yellow's going to be a problem. Hatzatzti bo v'lo haya vodam bris. I examined and I saw that there was no blood by his by the makom mila. It wasn't red there. I didn't think it would flow. So Amartila Biti himtini lo ad shiyipol botamo. Wait until the blood circulates more, where it's reaching his makom amila. Hamisina lo malo osavachai. So she waited, and eventually the blood circulated, and she circumcised him, and he lived. V'hayu koronoso nasan habavli al shmi. Maybe I drawn this, and they called him Nasan Habavli after me. So there's a number of things that come off this brisa, which the commentators discuss. First of all, what's interesting is we saw in prior Gemaras there's a machlokas of what a chazaka is, right? We generally think of a chazaka as 3 times, but here she was panicking after 2, and he seemed to kind of accommodate that. And so one opinion is that he's going after. There's a machlokas whether it's 2 or 3, and so one opinion is she's going after 2. Another opinion is no, it's it's a kind of nefashos, and you're not going to mess around with sakana nefashos. That's the way to look at it.
I think with bris there's a special law that you don't have to do a bris.
The third one, right?
Died before.
2 specifically, not 3.
Yeah, there is the law like that.
Yeah, you could be an oral, right? You don't have to do the bris if a number of the kids die. Right, not so good to be an oral necessarily.
She did.
Right.
I tried, check it out. But David, the bottom line is that if the lung is a greenish or red, it's kosher la Pesach.
Kosher Pesach.
But if it's yellow,
we're gonna get to yellow. Yellow's gonna be a problem.
It's a problem.
Yellow's a problem.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. But just on this also, what's another question that comes up here? one of the questions that comes up also is, at least, well, for the Sephardim, it's not a question. For the Ashkenazim, it's a question, right? She named him after Nassan Abavli, who was living. So Ashkenazim have a very strong minhag. We don't name after the living. And this Gemara sounds like it's certainly not an issue. So what I heard Rav Elefant posit, he said that some people have the belief that the reason you don't name after the living is because you don't really know how a person's going to end up. You don't really know his character until he dies, until he completes his life. So maybe a person's really, seems like a tzaddik, or he's not a Russian, you're going to name after him, but really he's going to end up being a Russia, so you want to wait till he completes his life. Nassan Abavli, they didn't have such a concern, because he was Nassan Abavli. He was, one of the Gedolim. So that's what they do with that Gemara. And then just the other thing that the poskim discussed from this Gemara also is you see that specifically he wanted there to be blood in the Makom HaMilah. So, in general, and by no means an expert, but it sounds like there's a whole topic of conversation around if you give the bris and there's no blood, and how much kind of you have to try to force the issue to create blood. And then it comes into the issue of clamps. Some people want to, I think even in hospitals apparently, they clamp it to dull it. So it's a problem potentially if it doesn't let the blood go there. So there's what to be learned from over here. And then just
Okay, let's move on.
Gabriel's getting queasy. Okay, Amar of Kahana.
You're okay, don't worry.
Kikavda kishera. If the lung is the color or has the appearance of the liver, it's still considered kosher. I'm not 100% sure what the color of the liver was, but if it looks like that, that would be okay. It's kosher. It's red. Okay. Dark. Kibisra treifa. However, if it's like the color of normal meat, it's treifa. So whatever the color of normal meat is, that pinkish red, that's considered a treifa. V'simenachan, how do you know to remember that if it looks like the color of meat, it's a treifa? Because the Torah says ubasar basada treifa. If and the meat in the field is a treifa, and obviously that pasuk's really referring to where if an animal tears it. It's not really talking to our version of treifa, but they're using that as a mnemonic, as a way to remember it. Amar of Sama braids Rava. Baruch, this gets to your question about yellow. Hi Ria. What if the lung is the damya kifshuta? If it's the color of hops, uchmorika, or saffron, uchagon bisa treifa, or uchagon bisa, or similar to an egg. I'm assuming you're talking about an egg yolk. It becomes a treifa. So these are all items that have a yellowish appearance, and if the lung is yellow, it would be a treif. But you told us Eli Yeruka Tichshera Hechi Damya. But so how would you find a case of Yeruka that's kosher? We said the word Yeruka too, which I guess also can be considered yellow, not green. So Kicharti, like a leek, or like Izzy said earlier, like grass, or like celery. So there's different shades. So Yeruka, the Yeruka that we're saying is kosher is the Yeruka that's green.
What's a sickness called sahevet? Sahevet, it means like the color tzahov, like yellow.
Is that jaundice?
Sahevet.
I don't know. Yeah.
It was very bad in the 50s. A lot of kids were dying.
Not enough blood flow, maybe? I don't know.
Johnson is fairly common.
Yeah, but I think I'm guessing that there's a difference between the organ's color and the people's color, which is kind of interesting because they can be comparing it back and forth, and they also compare the comparison of people to animals.
Definitely it is. Because let's say you get a mosquito bite on your skin, it gets red. Okay, according to the lung, it's kosher.
Right.
Okay, but it has a hole in it, so it's not. I think for lung is a different rules than.
You would think, but on the other hand, we just saw a whole brisa which talked about the color of a person, and then we equated that to the color of lung. So I don't know if he was just trying to say that green and yellow and red go together, and that was his point. I don't think he was necessarily talking about green and red being healthy and not healthy, because a cow lung and an infant is two different things. So it must be talking about that. It's a similarity of the colors. Right. Okay. Amar Ravina. Now, new case. Question of the Gemara. Asum Bereya. What if the Reya is clogged? So, Maisina and Sakina Vakarin law. So what do? We bring a knife and we cut it open. I ispa mugla. So if the pus moves, vadai mechmas muglahu kshera. So then we know it really is kosher. Why? What's the concern? If the pus can move, then airflow can get through. The whole point is these along is to capture the air. If the airflow can move through or not. V'ilo, but if the pus doesn't move, so maybe it was like a solid blockage, in which case it was really destined to die very quickly. So most v'nala gatfa oroka. So then what we do is we put a feather or some saliva on top of it. If it flutters, if it bubbles, then the animal is kosher, right? Because then there's airflow that can come through and push it up. The low treifa, but if it doesn't, it's a treifa. Very practical, right? If it's a blockage and it's a complete blockage where no airflow can get through, then it's treifa. If the airflow could get through, it's kosher. And if you're not sure, run a science experiment.
That's how they're testing the pipes with the cooking gas. They put the bubble on it and see if it bubbles, and then they know there's a hole in there.
For what?
In the condition. That's how they test the pipe to see.
Oh, right. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, same idea, exactly.
Yeah.
You gotta first diagnose if there's a leak.
Ah, right.
So we're gonna deal with soon. And what if you diagnose and you know there's a leak, but you can't find the leak?
You know how it works.
So Amar Rav Yosef, krum she'ala mechmas maka bria eno krum. Right. If there's a scab, we saw this earlier. If there's a scab that's on top of a wound, it's not considered a proper coverage. A scab is not considered a complete healing. It's considered deficient. Amar Rav Yosef, hi ria da'afsha. What if there's a lung that's whistling? It's making a noise. If we know where the noise is coming from, then we run the experiments. Manchinan Allah gadfa ogila oroka. Then we put on top of it a feather, a piece of straw, or saliva. Treifa. If it flutters, if we see the air moves it, so then we know it was treifa because it was a hole. So the lung has an actual hole. This is no longer the case of blockage. The ilo kshera, and if it doesn't flutter, then it's kosher because the lung doesn't have a puncture. The ilo yadinala. Now, what if you heard the whistling of the lung, so you thought there might be a hole, but you can't diagnose where it is. So what do you do?
Maybe the animal was smoking too many cigarettes.
Well, but the point is that you know there's a problem, but you don't see a hole. So what do you do? Is it kosher or is it not kosher? Right? We don't want to waste. We don't want to just throw things out. So maisi mishichvasa damya demaya pshure. So they take out a bucket of lukewarm water, humos in la begava, and we put the lung into it. B'chamina lo dekavte. However, we don't use very hot water. Why? Because if we use very hot water, it's going to fill the hole, right? I guess it'll moisten it and thicken, and it will naturally cover the hole. The
What's going to happen is that you put in very hot water, it causes the lung to cook partially, so it shrinks up, and then you don't have you can't test it anymore.
It's funny. I actually thought the opposite. I thought that it would expand the flesh, and it would
When you cook meat, it shrinks. So
but right. I guess what I'm saying is, but it will come together, so you'll cover the hole. That's why I understood the warm water.
So when it shrinks,
you don't want to cover the hole. You want to find out where the hole
Totally.
is.
That's why you can't use hot water.
Right.
I guess what I was saying, what I thought was that it just I thought you were saying shrink and therefore it would break it. But right, but you're saying shrink and therefore it will cover it. Agreed. Yes.
You're right. Internally it's expanding. Externally it's shrinking.
Okay, that's how we look at it. Yeah. But it felt right. The point is that the hole is going to be covered up if it's hot water. Maybe because, like Todd's saying, because it compresses together. But I guess the way I was saying it was because of this. Because if it's cold, it stiffens. So if it stiffens, I was understanding that it would be like brittle, and potentially it can break and make a hole. And then you would think that it had a hole before, but really it didn't. It only had a hole now. So you don't want to mess it up. So Ella bakin le bipshu, right? Rather you do this middle place of water where it's not too cold and not too cold. Imivatz b'tza treifa. if you see a bubble come out of the water, right, because that means there's a hole, then it's a treifa. V'lo kshera, and if not, then it's kosher. Tata inkev ila lo inkev. But what if right? So how come we're sure it's kosher? Because what we say is that the inner membrane's punctured, but not the outer. Right? So there's a whistling because there's a hole, but it's the inner membrane and not the outer membrane. So like we began this year with, like Kim brought up, it's only considered a proper puncture if it's punctured all the way through both membranes. So you could have a scenario where it's punctured once, you hear whistling because there's air getting in there, however it's not going all the way through. And that's what this test would show us.
They put, they blow it with the balloon, like a balloon, and to see if it, if the air goes
Yeah,
out.
I don't think you even need to blow it up if you submerge it into the water, right?
No, but I've seen it. They do that to check it out to make sure there is no hole in it.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just blow it. I was thinking about if it's sitting there stationary, how do you know what's going to make it pop? Correct. So you got to blow.
Okay. Yeah.
Amar Ula Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Riya shenishbecha kison keshera. Okay, what's this case? This is where the lung, the inside, the membrane inside, dissolved. So if you take the lung and pour it over, it actually drips out. So we're saying that sounds pretty bad, but nonetheless, that's not considered a treifa. That's not considered a fatal injury halachically or reality. So alma kasavron chisaron mibifnim lo shmei chisaron. So what we see is an internal deficiency is not considered a deficiency. A hole, kind of, it's only on the inside, is not considered a hole like it is if it would be on the outside and go all the way through. So what's the problem with that? Ace ve Rabbi Abba Leula, our Mishnah. What's our Mishnah said? We read it at the beginning of Shir. Hariya shenikva o shechasra. If the lung was nikva, it had a puncture, o shechasra, or was deficient, my chasra. What does it mean, deficient? If you're going to tell me it's a puncture from the outside, we already said that. Hainu nikva, right? That's a case in the Mishnah. But it's saying it's also chisaron. Elalav mibifnim. Rather, isn't the case of chisaron meaning a hole from the inside? Ushma mina charas chisaron mibifnim shmei chisaron. So you see that a chisaron, an emptiness of the inside, is considered a chisaron, in which case it should be treif. How could you tell me it's kosher, right? Our Mishnah tells us chisaron is a treifa, and we said that if you have the membrane melt inside, which we're saying is chisaron, and pour it out, that's kosher. Our Mishnah argues on that. No, really, it's talking to an external hole. So what about utka amarta hainu nikva? And now what you told me, we already have the case of nikva, an external hole. No, the reason we're talking about chisaron is lo tzricha ela Rabbi Shimon de amar adshe nikav lebeit hasimponot. Hane mile nekev de lesbe chisaron. Aval nekev de isbe chisaron afil Rabbi Shimon moda. What are we saying? In Achanami, according to the Tanakama, we do not need to list the case of chisaron because it's talking about an external wound that also has membrane inside that has melted or kind of been destroyed. However, Rabbi Shimon argued on our Tanakama, right? He said an external wound by itself is not going to be considered a treifa. Only if that external wound gets all the way to the main bronchial tube will that be considered a treifa. He argued. But so even Rav Shimon, in the case of where there's a hole and there's a bunch of membrane internally missing, he would say that's a treifa as well. So we had to list it. So what I'm saying is true. That really, if the inside of the membrane had melted away, it's kosher. If it doesn't have an external hole. What does the word chisaron mean? That's coming to show that even Rav Shimon would agree if it had an internal melting and a hole on the outside, even though that hole did not reach the bronchial tube, it would still be a treifa.
At the same location, back and up, in and out.
No, I don't think necessarily exactly.
It cannot be a scratch here and
I think he's saying it can.
back to back. I'm talking about.
You're saying it has to be?
It has to be. That's why this creates a hole in there. If it's one on the outside, on the top, and that the internal is from the bottom, too far. But I think it has to be.
Well,
back
no,
to
no
back.
matter what, it has to be a hole all the way through. We know it has to go through both membranes
The
because
back
everyone
to
said
back creates that whole all the way
right.
through.
But the point is, normally, if it goes through both membranes, Rabbi Shimon holds that if it goes through both membranes, unless it gets all the way to one of the main bronchial tubes, right? Basically, the windpipe goes to these two main bronchial tubes, which are going to go to these branches. Unless it gets all the way there, it's not considered a treifa, except if there's also a lacking of the innards. If the innards had melted enough where you could pour it out. Okay. On this idea, Rav Chananya Chalash, Alig Bey Rabbi Nassan, the Kol Gadol Yador. So he was sick, and all the great rabbis came to see him to ask him a shayla. Asu Kamei Ria Shnishbach Kiton. They brought in front of him this lung that pours out, like where the membrane pours out, the achshari, and he called it kosher. Amarava, Behu Dekaima Simponot. That's true. That which we're saying that if you could pour out the insides of the lung, it's still considered kosher as long as the bronchial tubes are still intact. If the bronchial tubes would be intact, because I learned this last night. Basically, I mean it's probably obvious to most people. Basically, the windpipe carries the air to the bronchial tubes, and that's what moves the oxygen. So if the bronchial tubes are compromised, that could create a real issue. So if they're still intact, it's okay if the membrane around the bronchial tube is dissolved. However, the bronchial tubes themselves have been compromised. That's a problem. So Amrle Ravacha Bred Rav Larashi Minayadin. How are you going to know whether the bronchial tubes, these are very thin little things, how are you going to know if they're dissolved? So Amrle Mysinan Sa Dekunya. We bring a very smooth basin, Veshavchinale Begavi, so you can see very clearly, and you pour the lung into it. If you see white streaks, which would represent the bronchial tubes, then it's a treifa. V'ilo kshera, and if not, it's kosher. So basically, if you see this melted membrane stuff inside, you have to do an extra step. Amar Rav Nachman, Ria shenimoka ukrum shala kaim kshera. If the lung decayed internally, losing some of its membrane, it's still considered kosher. This is a lesser degree case. Tanya namihachi. We learned a brisis regarding this case where it lost some of the membrane internally. Ria shenimoka ukrum shala kaim. If the lung decayed and the membrane was still intact, afilu mechsa korvia, even if it decayed so much that you can fit a quarter of a log of liquid in there, kshera, it's kosher. Kshera nitla. Shapuche shala kshera. Nitla shapuche shala kshera. If the uterus was removed, it's still considered kosher. Hitlia kaveh shala. If the liver became wormy, zahaya maisa, and sure that also be kosher. And this actually happened. Zahaya maisa. There was a case b'nei asya shalosh raglei liyavna, where a bunch of people of Asya went up to Yavna to get a ruling on this idea of a wormy liver, and they came 3 consecutive yontifs to try to get a ruling on it. The Raga Shlishi had Turlahem, and on the 3rd one, they permitted this wormy liver. Just in conclusion, what is
the liver to have at least 3 kazayas?
very good point. Well, just the kazayas or in the makam of the gallbladder. We saw that. So what's this case of the wormy liver? We know even if it's a tiny piece, it's really location based. And as long as there's a minimum shear, what's the idea of worminess? So there's 2 opinions. Either A, that this worminess is in the makom, it's by the gallbladder where it would be relevant, or it's within that kazayas. And the other opinion is saying, no, that was all talking about where there wasn't wormy.
Thank you.
Yeah.